Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2019. In this module we're going to take a look at creating our first form. And we've made a pretty good start on creating the Esprit de Tour database and also the Night Movies rental database. But next we're going to look at the use of forms to not only protect the database, but to enable people to do more complex tasks within the database. So essentially we're going to start to build forms that are focused on what people need to do. And forms in general are the way that most users will interact with the database. So far we've been using many tools that are really more used by designers and developers rather than tools that end users would use. So we're going to start out by just building a very simple form using the simplest approach. And really the objective of this module is to really get you used to the idea of looking at form properties. So it might be that I want to build a straightforward form to perform a task. For example, a form to maintain the list of countries in the Esprit de Tour database. So the first thing I'm going to do is, from my navigation pane, is just select the country table. I'm then going to go up to the Create tab, and you'll see in the middle here we have a Forms group with many different options in there. We have a Form button which will allow us to create a form. We have a Form Design button which will allow us to create a new blank form in Design View. We then have just a blank form with no controls or formatting. We have a form wizard. Now we've looked at a couple of wizards so far in this course. I'm a big fan of those, and this is what we're actually going to use in this first example. We then have a navigation pane that allows you to create a form that allows people to browse to different forms and reports. And then we have a More Forms drop down, which gives us lots of different types of forms that we can use, and we will be exploring some of these as we go through the course. Now, in this example, as I mentioned, I'm going to select Form Wizard. So the first thing that Form Wizard does is it looks at the table that we have selected, so in this case, Table Country, and it makes a list of all the fields within that table. And if you remember, we only have one field in there, and that is the country field. And what it basically says is these are the available fields, so in this case just one of them. Which ones would you like on the form? Now it's worth noting that if you are designing a form for someone to perform a specific task, you may not need all of the fields to be available on the form. So the first thing you really need to do is to determine which fields the user needs access to. Now in this case we only have one field, so I'm just going to add that one field by clicking on the right facing arrow in the middle there, which will add the country field over into the selected fields area. And of course, if I wanted to move that back to available fields, I could use these arrows at the bottom, which will move it back onto the left-hand side. And I'm going to click on Next. Now the Form Wizard is asking us to select a layout. And this can be a little bit confusing when you first see it, as it's not really apparent that the first and last options are both layouts where you only see one record on this form at a time. So in the columnar layout, however many fields there are, you will see them laid out in columns. With Justified, instead of having columns, you basically have the fields in the record spread out across the page. And with Tabular and Datasheet, you are basically seeing a scrolling list of records, and in each row you see the fields of the record. So I'm going to choose Tabular for my example. I'm going to click on Next, and we now need to give the form a name. Now I'm going to stick with my naming convention, so we've been adding Table on the front for tables. So when I'm using forms, the prefix I'm going to use is FRM. You can then choose how you want to open the form, or you can modify the form's design. So I can open or modify. Now in this case we're just going to open the form, and I'm going to click Finish. And there is my form. So I just want you to note the tabular layout. I also want you to note that in the navigation pane on the left now, I have a new category of forms. And this is the type of form that is highly customizable. However, first let's talk about the data. Each row represents one of the countries in the country table. So if I wanted to delete a country, for example USA, I can select it and just press the delete key on my keyboard. Alternatively, I could go up to the Home tab, and in the Records group I have a delete button just there, and I could choose to delete record. Now let me just try and delete it, and you'll see that I get an error message. So it says the record cannot be deleted or changed because the table double trip country includes related records. So that is that referential integrity coming into play. So I'm going to close that. Now if I wanted to edit this form, so maybe I wanted to change the name of Maldives to the Maldives, so let's just jump in there and add the word the. You can see that I don't get any integrity messages popping up, so editing these is absolutely fine. Now I'm actually just going to delete that back out again. And if I wanted to insert a new country into this list, inserts happen right at the bottom, so you can see I have a little blank field just there, so I can click in there and add a new country of Peru. And when I've made a change, in general I like to make sure that that's all saved, so I'm going to jump back up to the Home ribbon, and in the Records group just click my Save button. Now note that these countries are in alphabetical order, but now that we've added Peru, it hasn't reorganized itself, so these are no longer in sequence. And I'm going to show you how you can get around that a bit later on in this module. So this is the basic approach for data maintenance in a form. So now we're going to go into the design of the form. So on the Form tab, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go into Design View. Now this form currently has 3 sections. You can see there we have a form header, which also includes that country title. We then have a details section, and this is where all of the countries are listed. And then finally we have a form footer, and at the moment there is no footer on this form. Now I'm going to make one small change here to the header, and I am going to cover this a little bit more later on, but you can see here that the header gets a default content, so it's just picking up form country tabular, which is what I named this particular form. But I can go in and change that. So I'm just going to delete that out and change it to countries we visit. It's also worth noting that when I'm editing, there is an orange border around where I'm typing. So if I select the country field, you'll see that I then get that orange border, which means that I'm currently editing that field. And if I click up here in the Tools group on the Property sheet, you can now see all of the properties for the selected field. And you can see in here there are loads and loads of properties. And we're certainly not going to cover all of these, but we are going to take a look at a few of them. So let's start with the top one, which says Name. And the field is called the Country field. So that's fairly straightforward. What is the source? Well, it says here that the source is country, which it is in this form, and it's the country field in the Tubble country table record. What's the format? Well, currently the format is blank. Now there is a default for format, which is based on the fact that this type of field is a text box. So if it's blank in there, it usually means that it is a text box, as that is the default. So essentially we have a text box on a form, its name is country, and its control source is country, and it has a blank format. Let's go down these properties and just go to font size, and you can see currently there I have a font size of 11 in action. So I'm just going to change that to, let's change it to 20. And you can see immediately that that's reflected in our form design. Now if I go back to Form View, so I'm going to right click and go to Form View, you can see that it's increased that font size, but you can also see that it's now kind of, I can't really see the names of those countries, so I'm going to need to make a little bit of a change. So I'm going to jump back into Design View, And I'm just going to drag that down a little bit and just make some adjustments to the size of this box. There we go. Now let me just double check that by right-clicking and going back into Form View. And I can see that those look a lot better now. So hopefully that gives you more of an idea of the types of things that you can do when designing forms. Now I can see in here there is one correction that I need to make in South Africa. I just need to change that to a capital A. And I'm going to click Save. Now I'm going to jump back into Design View one more time and note that the country field is still selected. Now, if we right-click on that field, I want you to notice at the bottom, so Properties is currently open. That's the property sheet that we have on the right-hand side. But I also want you to note that we have Form Properties down here as well. So let's click on that. And now in our pane, we get the properties for the entire form as opposed to just the properties for the particular field that we had selected. And that is one of the most important things when you're using forms, is just making sure that you have the right object selected. So let's take a look at some of these fields. Right at the top we have record source and it says Tubble country. And that means that the records here are coming from the country table. I'm going to quickly jump across to this data tab and you can see that one of the properties here is order by. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say order by country. And that means that the entries on the form will be ordered by the country field in the record. So let's see how that affects our form. I'm going to right click and go back to Form View. And you can see that Peru is now in the correct sequence. So everything's been reordered into alphabetical order. So whilst Peru is now in the correct sequence, it's still at the end of the records in the table. I'm going to add another country at the bottom here. So that is Canada, and to get this to update by my sort order that I set, I'm going to go up to the Home ribbon and just select Refresh. And you can now see that Canada has jumped up into the correct position. So that is it. That is your introduction to creating a form. We're going to expand on this idea